अस्सलाम वालेकुम। डॉक्टर तलत अफजा माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स के 13 लेक्चर्स के साथ हाजिर है। इससे पहले कि हम आज का लेक्चर शुरू करें, हम पिछले लेक्चर्स को थोड़ा सा रिव्यू करना चाहेंगे, क्योंकि पिछले लेक्चर्स में हमने कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक्स को कंक्लूड किया था और वो इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक्स थे कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर एंड मार्केट डिमांड एंड कंज्यूमर डिमांड। जैसा कि आपको पता है कि ये कोर्स जो है वो माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स के बारे में है, जिसमें हम इंडिविजुअल यूनिट्स के डिसीजन मेकिंग को देखते हैं और दो मेन इंडिविजुअल यूनिट्स हैं, एक है आपका कंज्यूमर और दूसरा है प्रोड्यूसर। अभी तक पिछले 12 लेक्चर्स में हमारा फोकस जो है वो कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर पर ही रहा है, जबकि आज के लेक्चर और 2-3 और अगले आने वाले लेक्चर्स के बाद हम फिर प्रोड्यूसर्स बिहेवियर की तरफ फोकस चेंज करेंगे। लेकिन जितना हमने कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर के बारे में अभी तक कवर किया है, वी अज्यूम दैट द कंज्यूमर्स दे नो एवरीथिंग विद सर्टेनिटी। हमने ये कहा कि उनको प्राइसेस का पता है और उनको अपने इनकम के बारे में भी अच्छी तरह इल्म है। पिछले लेक्चर में बेस्ड ऑन द कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर इज दैट एवरीबडी इज गिवन विद सर्टेन इनकम लेवल एंड दे हैव टू मेक चॉइसेस फ्रॉम द market baskets, bundles which are available in the market on certain given price levels. Ab consumers, they were supposed to maximize their satisfaction, which is measured by utility, so that they are remaining within the budget constraint and they are able to achieve the highest level on the indifference curve. अब जब हम सारे कंज्यूमर्स को इकट्ठा कर लेते हैं तो हम उनका मुख्तलिफ प्राइस लेवल के साथ डिसीजन मेकिंग, चूजिंग द बंडल ऑफ गुड्स, रिमेनिंग विद द बजट कंस्ट्रेंट एंड मैक्सिमाइजिंग द सेटिस्फैक्शन पॉइंट्स को इकट्ठा करने के बाद एक इंडिविजुअल का डिमांड कर्व ले लेते हैं। जब हम एक इंडिविजुअल का डिमांड कर्व ले लेते हैं तो वहां से हमने लास्ट लेक्चर में प्रोसीड किया था टुवर्ड्स द मार्केट डिमांड। अब मार्केट डिमांड क्या है? मार्केट कंसिस्ट ऑफ व्हाट? मार्केट में सारे इंडिविजुअल्स ही मौजूद होते हैं। इंडिविजुअल कंज्यूमर्स दे मेक अप द मार्केट्स। तो मार्केट जो है वो रिफ्लेक्शन है सारे इंडिविजुअल्स का कलेक्टिव। तो हमने ये कहा कि सारे इंडिविजुअल्स के डिमांड कर्व्स को अगर हम सम अप करें, इकट्ठा करें, तो वी कम अप विद द मार्केट डिमांड। अब मार्केट की डिमांड एंड मार्केट की सप्लाई आर द टू मेन फोर्सेस व्हिच डिटरमिन योर प्राइस लेवल। और उस मार्केट डिमांड को, जो कि हमारी एग्रीगेट डिमांड थी, जो कि समेशन है ऑल इंडिविजुअल्स के डिमांड कर्व का, हमने इकट्ठा करने के बाद सर्टेन नेटवर्क एक्सटर्नैलिटीज को कवर किया, जिसमें हमने स्नॉब इफेक्ट एंड बैंड वैगन इफेक्ट को कवर करते हुए अपना लेक्चर क्लोज कर दिया। लेकिन इस पिछले लेक्चर में हमने, और उससे भी प्रीवियस आज तक जितने हमने लेक्चर्स कवर किए हैं, जितने भी टॉपिक्स हमने कवर किए हैं, इन सब में वी हैव अज्यूम्ड दैट देयर इज a situation of certainty where the individuals, consumers, they know their income level and they also know the price level. But when we come to the real life situation, आप खुद देखिए कि जब हम अपने इर्द गिर्द देखते हैं तो प्राइसेस जो है वो दे आर नॉट फिक्स्ड फॉर एवर। रादर वो शॉर्ट टर्म में भी एक थोड़े अरसे के दौरान भी आपकी प्राइस लेवल्स जो हैं वो चेंज होता रहता है, और वो इस चेंजिंग सिनेरियो के साथ हमारी डिसीजन मेकिंग के ऊपर भी एक इम्पैक्ट जरूर आता है। दूसरी तरफ जब हम इनकम लेवल की बात करते हैं तो हमारे इनकम लेवल्स भी चेंज होते रहते हैं। Sometimes if you get a better job, you are placed in a higher income bracket. If you are in the process of switching job, then you are not in the labor force, you are not in the workforce. Temporarily, your income level drops sharply. अब इसी के साथ साथ जब हमारे पास इस तरह की अनसर्टेनिटीज होती हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल जब आप प्राइस लेवल की बात करते हैं, अगर मार्केट में आपकी एग्रीकल्चर प्रोड्यूस जो है वो अच्छी होने की वजह से प्रोडक्ट ज्यादा आ जाती हैं, देयर इज एवरी चांस कि आपका प्राइस लेवल जो है वो डिक्रीज कर जाएगा। इसी तरह अगर कोई नेचुरल किस्म की ऐसी सिचुएशन आ जाती है जिसमें कि आपकी एग्रीकल्चर प्रोड्यूस कम हो जाती है, तो उसकी वजह से आपकी सप्लाई कम होती है एंड प्राइस लेवल्स जो हैं वो ज्यादा हो जाते हैं। इसी तरह आपके वर्ल्ड ایونٹ جو ہیں وہ بھی افیکٹ کرتے ہیں آپ کی انٹرنل مارکیٹ کو ٹیمپریرلی. اگر پولیٹیکل اسٹیبلٹی ہے تو آپ کی مارکیٹس آر مور اسٹیبل اینڈ پرائسز آر مور اسٹیبل. اسی طرح اگر کوئی مارکیٹ دوسری کریش ہوتی ہے, ناٹ یور اون مارکیٹ, تو آپ کی اپنی اسٹاک مارکیٹ بھی کریش ہوتی ہے, آپ کی اکانومی کے اوپر انڈائریکٹلی افیکٹ ہوتا ہے. سرٹن ادر پروڈکٹس ہیں جیسے پیٹرولیم پروڈکٹس ہیں جو کہ ہم امپورٹ کرتے ہیں. اب پیٹرولیم آپ کے ایک امپورٹنٹ رول پلے کرتا ہے ان میکنگ اینڈ پروڈیوسنگ سو مینی ادر گڈس اینڈ سروسز. اب جب یہ ایک امپورٹنٹ رول پلے کر رہا ہے اور اس کی پرائس جو ہے دیٹ از کمنگ فرام دی ورلڈ مارکیٹ, اگر وہاں پہ پرائسز چینج ہوتی ہیں تو ڈیفینیٹلی وی کین ناٹ ڈو اینی تھنگ ایلس ادر دین چینجنگ آر اون پرائس لیول ایٹ ہوم. تو یہ سارا سینیریو بنانے کا یا بتانے کا مقصد یہ ہے کہ ابھی تک پچھلے لیکچرز میں ہم نے جو کور کیا, ہم نے اس میں یہی ازمپشن لگائی تھی کہ پرائسز آر گیون, دے آر نون, انکم لیولز آر گیون, اینڈ وی آر لوکنگ ایٹ دی پروسیس تھرو وچ این انڈیویجول میکس its rational choice and select a bundle of goods. آج کے لیکچر میں ہم تھوڑا سا اس ازامپشن کو ریلیکس کریں گے اور ہم دیکھیں گے کہ اگر یہ پرائس لیولز اینڈ انکم لیولز یہ اگر نون نہ ہوں تو پھر آپ کے کنزیومر کی ڈیسیژن میکنگ جو ہے وہ کس طرح افیکٹ ہوتی ہے اور کنزیومر کو کس طرح اس چینجنگ سینیریو کو شوڈ ٹیک انٹو اکاؤنٹ. اس لیے آج کے ٹاپک جو ہم آج لیکچر میں کور کریں گے وہ ہم uncertainty and risk کے بارے میں ہے. They are both related concept. Risk and uncertainty is the topic for the today's lecture. اور اس میں ہم بیسیکلی جو فوکس کریں گے وہ ہوگا ہمارا probability کے اوپر, and probability کے ساتھ expected value and then the variability of the outcomes from the expected value. تو آج کے لیکچر میں ہم سب سے پہلے جو ہے ڈسکرائب کریں گے رسک کو ایز سچ کہ وٹ بیسیکلی از دی رسک. جیسے کہ میں نے پہلے ہی انٹروڈکشن میں آپ کو بتایا کہ جو رسک ہے دیٹ از اے سچویشن ویئر یو ڈو ناٹ نو ایوری تھنگ ود سرٹینٹی. وہاں ایلیمنٹ آف چینج از آلویز دیئر. اگر ہم سرٹینٹی کی سچویشن میں دیکھتے ہیں تو چوائسیز کرنا بہت آسان ہے, جس طرح ریزنیبلی دے آر اسٹریٹ فارورڈ. جیسے کہ ہم نے پچھلے سارے لیکچرز میں دیکھا کہ اگر آپ کو پرائسز پتا ہے, انکم لیول پتا ہے, آپ بڑے کمفرٹیبلی اپنی ایک کنزیومر چوائس بنا کے اپنی بنڈل آف گڈس جو ہے وہ سلیکٹ کر سکتا ہے. لیکن سپوز اب آپ کے یہی پرائسز اور یہی انکم لیولز دے آر ناٹ فکسڈ anymore. They are not known with certainty. There is every likelihood that they can keep on changing. تو جب یہ پرائس لیولز اور انکم لیولز چینج ہوتے ہیں تو پھر ہم کس سینیریو میں آتے ہیں, اس سینیریو کو ہم کہتے ہیں کہ وی آر فیسڈ ود اے سچویشن وچ از ڈسکرائبڈ ایز اے رسکی سچویشن. اب اس رسکی سچویشن کو ایکسپلین کرنے کے لیے ہم اور کس طرح ہم اس کو ڈیسیژن میکنگ میں یوز کریں گے, what do we do is we need to know two basic things. Number one, کہ all possible outcomes should be known. And number two, that the likelihood of each possible outcome to occur that should also be known. اب اس کو ذرا سمپلیفائی کرنے کے لیے ہم کیا کہنا چاہ رہے ہیں, ہم یہ کہنا چاہ رہے ہیں کہ اگر ایک سینیریو ہے جس میں چیزیں جو ہے دے آر ناٹ نون ود سرٹینٹی, تو پھر ہمیں کیا ہے, سپوز فار ایگزامپل کہ اگر آپ ایک ڈائس رول کرتے ہیں تو ڈائس کے اوپر آپ کے پاس کیا ہے, دیر آر 6 نمبرز 1 2 3 4 5 and 6. اب اس سینیریو میں آپ کی ساری آل پاسبل آؤٹ کمز کیا ہیں کہ یا 1 آئے گا, 2 آئے گا, 3 4 5 اور 6, اینی نمبر کین کم اپ. So all of these 6 numbers which are given on a dice, they are all possible outcomes. So number one, when we are trying to describe the risk, we should know all possible outcomes. اسی طرح ایک اور ایگزامپل لے لیں کہ اگر ہم نے ایک کوائن فلپ کرنا ہے تو کوائن کو فلپ کرنے کے possible outcomes کیا ہیں, either a head will come or a tail will come. تو اب اس کے possible outcomes 2 ہیں and these are either a head or a tail. اسی طرح ہم جس بھی سینیریو میں بات کر رہے ہیں, اگر ہم اکانومی کی بات کر رہے ہیں فار ایگزامپل, تو اکانومی میں نارملی جو ہے ہم 3-4 बिजनेस साइकिल की सिचुएशंस को लेते हैं, या तो इकोनॉमी जो है वो रिसेशन में होगी, स्लो डाउन मोड में होगी, या वो रिकवर कर रही होगी, या वो इकोनॉमी जो है एक बूम की सिनेरियो में होगी. तो if we are talking about the economic conditions or the situation in your economy, तो all possible outcomes क्या हो सकती हैं? आपके पास रिसेशन हो सकता है, रिकवरी हो सकती है, या बूम की सिनेरियो जो है वो प्रिवेल कर सकता है. इसके साथ साथ एक और सिनेरियो भी हो सकता है विच इज द डिक्लाइन, कि बूम से आप डाउनवर्ड जो है वो ट्रेवल कर रही है आपकी इकोनॉमी. तो अगर हम इन 4 सिनेरियोज को लें, बूम, आपका रिसेशन, रिकवरी एंड डिक्लाइन, तो अब आपकी पॉसिबल आउटकम्स जो हैं वो 4 हो जाती हैं. तो जब भी हमने एक रिस्की सिचुएशन को देखना है जिसमें वन ऑफ द इवेंट कैन टेक प्लेस, तो सबसे पहले हमें क्या पता होना चाहिए? हमें ये पता होना चाहिए कि पॉसिबल इवेंट्स हैं कितने. ऑल पॉसिबल आउटकम्स शुड बी नोन. वंस वी नो all possible outcomes, the second thing is कि we should know कि what is the possibility that these outcomes will occur. Okay? और ये जो possibility है या ये जो likelihood है, this is known as the probability of occurrence. अब हम probability को basically interpret कैसे करते हैं? Simply, probability is the likelihood that a possible outcome will occur. अब जैसे हमने पिछली एग्जाम्पल्स ली हैं, हमने डाइस की एग्जाम्पल ली, हमने कहा कि देयर आर 6 पॉसिबल आउटकम्स. क्या क्या पॉसिबल आउटकम है? नंबर 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 एंड 6. एनी वन ऑफ दीज कैन अकर. इसलिए अगर आपकी एक फेयर डाइस है, उसमें कोई बायस नहीं है, तो हर एक की लाइकलीहुड ऑफ अकरेंस क्या होगी? 1/6. इसी तरह जब हम हेड और टेल की बात करते हैं, कॉइन फ्लिपिंग की बात करते हैं, तो हर एक आउटकम की पॉसिबिलिटी क्या है? देयर आर ओनली 2 पॉसिबल आउटकम, सो द लाइकलीहुड ऑफ हेड कमिंग अप इज 1/2 एंड द लाइकलीहुड ऑफ टेल कमिंग अप इज अगेन 1/2. So these are the 2 possible likelihoods. When we are talking about the economy as such, and we said there are 4 possibilities. We talked about the boom, recession, recovery and decline. Then what is the likelihood? What is the probability? Again, the probability is 1/4 for each of these possible outcomes. अब जब हम probability की बात करते हैं, we said okay, this is the likelihood of occurrence of a particular event. लेकिन within the probability जरूरी नहीं है कि हर इवेंट में हर possible outcome is equally likely. There can be a different scenario as well in the real life. Ab, before we go into the detail of determination of the probability, we need to focus on the various types of the probabilities. अब probabilities जो हैं हमारी 2 तरह की होती हैं. एक है हमारी objective probability और दूसरी है हमारी subjective probability. Now what basically is an objective probability? The objective probability is that based on the past experience, okay, and if we have undertaken a successive series of such experiments, and what is the possibility that one particular outcome will take place. So this is the objective probability, which is based on the past experience of occurrences of such related certain type of experiments with all possible outcomes. But this is the objective probability. Objective probability is where your personal bias is not that much, because all you are doing is based on your previous experience, past experience. So it has something on the backing, and the backing is the past experience. There is another type of probability which is known as the subjective probability. Now the subjective probability in comparison to the objective probability is the one where there is no backing of the past experience. It is not based on your past experience. Now what then is focused here? That is based on your feeling and personal judgment. Now when we are saying it is based on your feeling and personal judgment, the personal judgment is based on certain type of information. So you have certain information available to you, and based on that information, what you have to do is you have to come up with certain probability that a possible event will take place. Therefore, when we are talking about the probabilities, there are 2 types of probabilities. One is the objective probability and the other is the subjective probability. Now, going back again to the subjective probability, the accuracy of that is dependent on two things. Number one is the available information, how much information is available to you. If you have more information, then you can come up with a better probability estimate. And the number two is the ability of the person to use and interpret this information to come up with a probability. If a person has a solid background in statistics and has the experience of certain similar type of event before, that probability will be better than an other individual who doesn't have that kind of strong background, plus doesn't have the experience of similar type of event in the past. Therefore, the subjective probability is kind of bit biased, which is based on the available information and the ability of the individual to use the information to come up with certain probability levels. Now, using these probabilities and all possible outcomes, we come up with what is known as the expected value. The expected value basically is the weighted average of the payoffs or the value resulting from all possible outcomes. For that, the probability of each outcome should be known and all of those outcomes themselves should be known. Your expected value is also known as the central tendency, the measure of the central tendency or the average. In general, in simple statistics and in simple arithmetic, how do we define average? We say the average is, if we have 5, 6, 7 observations, we add them together and then we divide it by the number of observations and we come up with the average. Average is a measure of central tendency. Average, which is also known as the mean, is known as the center, or where all of these left hand, right hand, negative, positive values will converge. That is your central tendency. So, our expected value is exactly the same thing, in which we are talking about all possible outcomes, and then related to all those possible outcomes is the probability. So, when we are taking into account all possible outcomes with their respective probabilities, we can comfortably calculate the expected value is the measure of central tendency or the average for that particular scenario. In order to explain the expected value, we take an example. The example is that we are trying to drill, we are trying to explore by drilling. Drilling may be petroleum or certain mineral items. Now, there are always two chances. One is either you will be able to discover the oil, the event will be a success, or the other is you will not be able to discover the oil, the event will be a failure. जब हम oil recover कर लेते हैं by drilling, event is a success, तो उस सूरत हाल में कंपनी का शेयर जो है in the marketplace, it will rise from the current value of $30 to $40 per share. यानी इस ऑयल एक्सप्लोरिंग कंपनी का इस वक्त शेयर मार्केट में $30 पर शेयर बिक रहा है. तो जब अगर हम एक्सप्लोर करते हैं और द इवेंट इज अ सक्सेसफुल इवेंट, यू आर एबल टू डिस्कवर द ऑयल, तो मार्केट प्राइस ऑफ द शेयर विल गो अप फ्रॉम 30 टू 40. दूसरी सिनेरियो में जबकि event is not a success, then the price of the share will go down from $30 to $20 per share. Now, attached with this is one more information, and that information is what is the probability of a success for this particular exploration and what is the probability of a failure. Now, again, as I previously described, there are two types of probabilities. One is the objective probability and the other is subjective probability. Ab objective probability is based on the past experience. Now, since this company is in the oil exploration from quite a long time, so the past experience says that there are 25% chances that the event will be a success. That out of 100 explorations, they were successful in 25 of them. and out of 100 exploration they were unsuccessful in 75 of the drilling exercises. So the probability of success is 1 by 4, which is 25 over 100 is exactly equal to 1 by 4, and the probability of a failure of not able to get any oil is 75 over 100, which is 3 by 4. Now using this information and the objective probability of 1 by 4 for success and 3 by 4 for failure, let's calculate the expected value, and that is calculated on this slide. Slide पे what are we writing here? We are saying expected value EV is equal to the probability of success. If there is a success, then what is the outcome? Outcome is the share price will go up from $30 to $40. So the share price will be $40 per share. Plus the probability of failure, which is the 3 by 4 based on the past experience. And what will be the outcome? The outcome will be the share price will go down to $20 per share. So we take 1 by 4, which is the probability of success, multiplied by the outcome, which is $40 per share price, plus 3 by 4, which is the probability of failure, into $20 per share price. So overall the expected value is $25 per share. Now up to now, when we were discussing the other topics, what we have done is we assume that there is no such event of whether event will be a success or failure, whether this possible outcome will be there or that possible outcome will be there. Rather, we simply said, okay, if this is the price, then this will be the quantity demanded, and if this is the income, then this will be the total demand. But in today's lecture, what we are doing is we are taking the probabilities, we are taking all possible outcomes, as is the case for this example, the oil drilling thing. So in general, whenever we talk about the expected value, we can make a generalized type formula that if there is a possibility of more than one possible outcome, and there is a chance that one outcome can take place with more likelihood than the other outcome, so we come up with the expected value, taking into considerations all possible outcomes and all related probabilities of respective outcomes. The generalized formula is given on this slide here. So in this slide, we are taking again two possible outcomes, having two payoffs. Payoffs are the resultant outcomes, x1 and x2. And we are taking the probabilities of each outcome as PR1 for x1, first event, and PR2 for the second event. So in general, we can write down the formula for the expected value. We say E of x, which is the expected value of that possible event x, is equal to PR1 x1 plus PR2 x2, plus if we have n number of outcomes, so we have PRn into xn. So this is about the expected value. After this expected value, there is a possibility. The possibility is that this is what you were expecting based on all possible outcomes and all the probabilities. But when the actual outcome takes place, there is a possibility that the actual is different from your expected. And this particular phenomena is explained with the help of a concept which is known as the variability. As such, whenever we talk about the variability, variability is the variation from certain thing. Now here that certain thing is your central tendency, the expected value. So the variability basically is the concept where we are saying the all possible outcomes, how do they vary from each other? How much is the variation between those possible outcomes? In order to explain this concept of the variability, we take an example here again. The example is that suppose you have to choose between two job offers. The first job is a commission-based job and the second job is a salaried job. But both of these jobs, whether it is a commission job or whether it is a salaried-based job, has an expected value of $1,500 each. Now your expected value is the same, but here we are trying to calculate the variability. In order to calculate the variability here, we need to know the possible outcomes. The possible outcomes are that for job 1, there are 2 possible outcomes. Number 1 is that if you can do a good business, you will be paid a commission of $2,000. But if you are not doing a good business effort, you will be paid an amount of $1,000. So these are the 2 possible outcomes. We also need to know the probabilities. So the probability here, we are assuming for simplicity that there is the equal probability that they are both equally likely that you will have a good business or you will have bad business, not that good business. So if you have a good business, the probability, since there are 2 possible outcomes, the probability is 1/2 or 0.5. And the probability of not having a good business where you will be paid $1,000 again is 0.5. The second scenario, which is a salaried job here. So if the company is doing a good business, you will be paid a salary of $1,510. And if the company is not doing a good business, then what will happen? You will be only paid $510. Now, these are the 2 possible outcomes. The company will do good, you will get $1,510. And number 2, the company is not able to do well, and therefore you are being paid $510. So what we need to know now is the probability. The probability is that there are 99% chances that the company will do a good business. So the probability of getting 1,510 is 0.99, and the probability of getting $510 is 0.01. Now, with these probabilities, let's calculate the variability here, the variability which is the measure of risk. On this slide here, we have outcome 1, outcome 2, and what we are doing is we are calculating the variabilities and the expected values for 2 offers. One is a commission job and the other is a fixed salary job. With the commission job, you do have a possibility of making money which is $2,000, but the probability of getting $2,000 is 50%. Then you have an offer of getting $1,000 and the probability of getting $1,000 is 50% or 0.5. On the fixed salary job, the 99% probability that you will be able to get $1,550, that the company will do good, and then the probability is only 1% that you will get $510 when the company is not doing well. So calculating the expected value here, the expected income from our point of view, if we take E of x1, that is 0.5 into 2,000 plus 0.5 into 1,000, that is the expected income from job number 1, which is $1,500. Then for job 2, which is EX2, 0.99 is the probability of doing a good business for the company. So you will be getting 1,510 plus 1% probability with an amount of 510, you will be getting 1,500. So if we look at the expected value here, the expected value from job 1 and job 2 is exactly the same. You are getting the same expected value, you are getting $1,500 if you go for a commission job, you are getting $1,500 if you go for a salary based job. But what is the difference here? The difference here is the variabilities in the outcome. In the commission job, you are touching a level of $2,000 per month, whereas in the salary job, the maximum you can get is 1,510. But that 1,510 you are getting 99% of the time. The possibility is 99%. But getting 2,000, which is definitely way above 1,510, is only 50%. So in order to take care of these variations in the possible outcomes, and even on the other side is that if you are not doing a good commission business, you are making 1,000, but if the company is not doing a good business, then you are only getting 510. So the scenario is that if the company is not doing well and you are on salaried job, 1% chance is there that this event will take place and you will be getting only 510. Whereas in commission based job, if you are not performing well, then you will be getting 1000 and the probability of getting 1000 is 50%. But the expected value from job 1 and job 2 is exactly the same, 1500 and 1500. So let's look at the variability from these two jobs so that we can come up with a different scenario. Now from the variability point of view, we always say the greater the variation, the more as the riskiness, because the variability is measuring the spread or dispersion or variation in between the possible outcomes. The deviation, of course, in order to calculate the variation, we need to look at the deviation. So the deviation basically is the difference between the expected value and the actual payoff. If we want to do that, let's look at this slide here. Deviation from the expected income. We have outcome number 1 and we also have the outcome number 2. If we start with job number 1 here, if you do a good business, you will be able to make $2,000 per month. Our expected value was 1,500. So what is the variation or the deviation of this actual payoff of 2,000 from the expected value of 1,500? Deviation is 2,000 minus 1,500, which is your column number 3, listed as $500. The outcome 2 of the first job is $1,000. What is our expected value? 1,500. So if we take 1,000 minus 1,500, so our deviation is minus $500. Now if we do the same for the job number 2 in the last row here, so in the last row, the second column, if the company does a good business, you will be getting $1,510. And how much is the deviation? You take 1,510 minus the expected value of 1,500. So the next entry 10 is the deviation from the expected value. Then the other possibility is that if the company is not doing well and it is closing down the business, you are only getting 510 and the deviation will be 510 minus 1,500, which is minus 900. अब इस स्लाइड में हम ये देख रहे हैं कि देयर आर सर्टेन पॉजिटिव वैल्यूज एंड देयर आर सर्टेन नेगेटिव वैल्यूज. डेविएशंस को अगर हम देखें तो जॉब 1 में हमारे पास पॉजिटिव डेविएशन है 500 की और एक नेगेटिव डेविएशन है माइनस 500. जॉब 2 में जब हम देखते हैं तो एक नेगेटिव डेविएशन है हमारे पास 900 की और एक पॉजिटिव डेविएशन है हमारे पास 10 की. नाउ हाउ टू टेक केयर ऑफ इट, क्योंकि जब भी नेगेटिव नंबर आ जाता है तो सिचुएशन जो है वो काफ़ी मुश्किल हो जाती है फॉर इंटरप्रिटेशन, क्योंकि आपका जो सेंटर है दैट इज 1500, जबकि आपकी जो वैल्यूज हैं दे आर ऑन द बोथ साइड्स. जब भी आपकी वैल्यू इज हायर देन द एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू विच इज दिस सेंटर हियर, देन यू गेट अ पॉजिटिव नंबर. If your value is lower than the center, which is the expected value, then you get a negative number. अब हम ये सारा कुछ जो है वेरिएशन देख रहे हैं. वेरिएशन हमारे पास डिविएशन की शक्ल में नेगेटिव भी है और पॉजिटिव भी है. जब हमने ज्यादा या कम की बात करनी है, वी कैन नॉट कंक्लूड एनीथिंग विद द नेगेटिव एंड द पॉजिटिव वैल्यू पुट टुगेदर. Therefore, what we do is we use a measure of variation which is a commonly used measure of risk known as the standard deviation. तो स्टैंडर्ड डिविएशन में हम ये क्या करते हैं कि इन नेगेटिव वैल्यूज को टेक केयर करने के लिए वी टेक द स्क्वायर रूट, वी टेक द स्क्वायर, सॉरी नॉट द स्क्वायर रूट, रादर द स्क्वायर. तो जब हम स्क्वायर लेते हैं हमारी नेगेटिव वैल्यूज जो हैं दे टर्न इनटू पॉजिटिव वैल्यूज. तो जब standard deviation basically is a measure of risk, okay, commonly used, which is you take the square of the deviations and then you take the average of all of those deviations. ये जो calculated value आएगी ये आपका variance है, and when we take the square root of the variance, that basically is the standard deviation. जब भी हम वेरिएशन की बात करते हैं, नॉर्मली देयर आर सर्टेन measures of variations. There are very simple measures of variations which we define as the range. Range is the difference between the highest value and the lowest value. So it explains you that the values are ranging from this lowest value to this highest value. Whereas there are other certain measures of variations which are quartiles and deciles, but commonly used measure for, especially for measuring the risk standard deviation. Standard deviation and the variance, they have a close relationship. If we calculate the squared deviations, average of them, that is your variance, and we take the square root of it, that becomes our standard deviation. Now, how do we calculate it? With the help of the formula. The formula is shown on this particular slide. The standard deviation is written as, the notation we commonly use is known as the sigma, coming from the Greek letter. Sigma is a most commonly used notation for the standard deviation. So, the sigma is equal to the probability of event 1 or payoff 1, PR1 into x1 minus Ex square. So, what is this here? X1 is one outcome and Ex is the expected value which we have already calculated. Try to recall, we said if we take the all possible outcomes and we multiply them with the respective probabilities, so that gives us the expected value. Summing them together is the expected value. For our example, we calculated for the event 1 the expected value as 1500, job 1. For job 2, again our expected value was 1500. For job 1, we had two outcomes, 1000 and 2000 with the probabilities of 0.5 and 0.5. For job 2, we had two outcomes, 1510 with the probability of 0.99, and then we had 510 with the probability of 0.01. So, we can plug in these probabilities and we can also plug in the respective expected values. We take the deviations, and the deviation, as we noticed in the previous table, they were positive as well as negative. Therefore, we are going to take the square of it in order to take care of the negative values. If we take the square of it, then what do? Is we come up with certain positive value and then we multiply it with the probability, we come up with the variance. And in order to come down to the standard deviation, we need to take the square root of the variance. So, in order to look at the calculations here, let's look at this slide here. इस slide पे हम पहले variance calculate करेंगे और उसके बाद उसका square root लेने के बाद that will be converted into the standard deviation. Job 1 में हमारी outcome 1 is 2000 और हमारा जो expected value या center point था that is 1500. तो deviation कितनी हो गई? Deviation is 500 positive value. So, since it is positive, but in order to take care of certain other negative values, we need to take the square of this value. So, the deviation here is 500. We take the square of it, it becomes 250,000. Next column. Then outcome 2 is 1000. Deviation there was minus 500. So, when we take the square of this deviation, we come up with 250,000, which is the positive number. Now, the square deviation multiplied by their respective probabilities. We take 0.5 multiplied by 250,000 plus 0.5 multiplied by 250,000, we come up with the second last column entry for job 1, 250,000. Now, this is our variance here. Now, if we take the square root of it, we will come up with the last entry, which is the standard deviation. So, the standard deviation is the square root of 250,000, which is the $500. Now, we calculate the variance and the standard deviation for job 2. Job 2, one payoff is 1510 and the deviation from the center of the expected value is 100. Why? Because the expected value for job 2 again was calculated as 1500. So, the deviation is 10 when we take the square of this deviation, that becomes 100. Then the outcome 2 was 510 when the company is not doing a good business and it's only paying you $510. So the deviation from the center, which is the expected value of 1500, was minus 900. So when we take minus 900, so it again is a negative value, we take the square of it, so we come up with 980,100. Now this basically is after multiplying, this basically is when we are taking the square of the both of these outcomes 1 and 2. We have 100 and we have 980,000. Now we take this 100 with this probability. The probability was 0.99. And then we take 980,000 multiplied by its own probability 0.01. So we come up with a value of 9,900, this second last entry for job 2. And that basically is the variance. Now when we take the square root of this variance, we come up with a standard deviation which is 99.50. So your job 1 has a higher standard deviation 500, your job 2 has a lower standard deviation which is 99.50. Now the same calculation can be shown with the help of this pure mathematical formula. So if you try to recall, we said sigma is equal to PR x1 PR1 x1 into x1 plus PR2 x2, and then you take the square root of it. So if we do the same for the job number 1, so for job 1 we have 0.5 into square deviation multiplied by this 0.5 and then the square deviation multiplied by again 0.5, that gives us the same value as of the previous table, 250,000. That is your variance and the standard deviation comes down to 500. Then for job 2, we do the same calculation, 0.99 multiplied by 100 plus 0.01 multiplied by 980,100. We come up with a variance of 9,900, we take the square root of it and then we have a standard deviation of 99.5. So for job 1, our standard deviation is 500, which is more. For job 2, our standard deviation is 99.5. Now, if we look at both of these jobs here, the expected value is the same, 1,500 and 1,500. But if we look at the variation in the possible outcomes, they were more for job 1 as compared to job 2. Therefore, when we tried to calculate it formally, a measure of risk, which is standard deviation, when we used it and we calculated that, job 1 had a standard deviation of $500, job 2 had a standard deviation of 99.50. So higher the standard deviation, higher the risk. So if you go for the first option, job 1, which is a commission base, though there is a possibility of making $2,000 and the probability is 50% that you can make $2,000, but again there is a probability that you end up making only 1,000 and that is also 50,000. Therefore, overall riskiness of this offer, job 1, is $500, whereas the riskiness of the regular salaried job, which is 99.50. Why? Because there are 99% chances that you will keep on making 1,510. So the element of certainty is a bit more there. There is only 1% chance that you will end up making $510 only. Therefore, if we have to look at both of these jobs and we look at the expected values, they are equally good. But when we are looking at the standard deviation, which is a measure of risk, job 1 is more risky as compared to job 2. Now, in this example, we only took 2 possible outcomes, but we can also use the standard deviation in order to explain more than one outcomes. And how can we do that? Here, let's take an example. In this example, we simply do not restrict ourselves to say 2 possible outcome of 2,000 and 1,000. Rather, what we assume here is there is one job where your payoff or the salary or the commission ranges from $1,000 to $2,000 with an increments of 100 each. which means you can have 1000, you can have 1100, 1200, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 and 20,000. So you can have 10 possible outcomes, earning streams, possibilities. You can, starting with 1000, you can go up to 2000, but all of these possible outcomes, there are 10 possible outcomes, they are equally likely. Equally likely means that there is equal chance that you can make up 1300 or you can make up 1700. So the probability therefore will be, if there are 10 outcomes, for each one of them the probability will be 1 by 10 or 0.1. Then there is a second job. In this job here, the commission or the income ranges from $1,300 to $1,700. So here the possible outcomes with an increment of 100 each. So the possible outcomes are 1300, 1400, 15, 16 and 17. So we have only 5 possible outcomes, and they are starting from 1300 and they are going up to 1700. Now when we try to calculate the probability, what are the chances here? So the given information or the assumption here is that all of these jobs, payoffs which are 13, 14, 15, 16 and $1,700, they are equally likely. So if we look at the chances of earning any one of them when they are equally likely, so we calculate it as 1 by 5. So the probability will be 0.2 for each of these possibilities. For job 1, we have 10 possible outcomes with a probability of 0.1 for each. For job 2, we have 5 possible outcomes with a probability of 0.2. Now if we have to look at both of these jobs 1 and 2 from the riskiness point of view, let's draw them with the help of a graph, and that graph is shown on this particular slide. अब इस स्लाइड पे on x-axis we have taken the income, on the y-axis we have taken the probability. जैसा कि हमने पहले कहा, job 1 में we have the ranges from 1000 going up to 2000 with an increment of $100 each. So we have 10 possible outcomes. So the blue line here, the lower graph is more spreaded outward, but with the lower peak is for job 1. For job 2, we have the possibilities starting from 1300 going up to 1700, only 5 possible outcomes with a probability of 0.2. Therefore, it is having more peak, the peak is above the job 1 and the spread is also less. Therefore, when we are talking about the variability here, the variability is more for job 1 as compared to job 2, and we can safely say that the job 1 is more risky as compared to job 2. When we look at the job 1, it has greater spread because it started from 1000, it ended at 2000, and there in between there are like 10 intervals. So the spread was more and therefore the risk is more. If we are looking at job 1 here, it started from $1,300, it ended up to $1,700, whereas the peak was high, the probability was 0.2 or 20%. So the job 2 is less risky and job 1 is more risky within this given assumption and the data set. We can also make generalization on the basis of this information that whenever we draw a probability distribution for any particular payoff, whenever the resulting curve has a higher peak and low spread, that is less risky as compared to a wider spread and a lower peak, and that is more risky. Now how can we use it for the decision making? We have two situations. Situation में job number 1 with expected value 1500 and a measure of risk which is $500 of standard deviation. Job number 2 with the same expected value 1500 but measure of risk standard deviation is 99.50. Normally individuals, they try to avoid risk. So a risk avoider will try to prefer job 2 over job 1. Why? क्योंकि job number 2 में آپ کے پاس 99% probability ہے کہ آپ 1510 انکم ارن کریں گے as compared to job number 1 where the variation is from 2000 to 1000 with the 50% probability. So the risk avoider will prefer job 2 over job 1. Now let's look at the same scenario by adding, let's assume we are adding $100 in job number 1 and we recalculate our expected value and the standard deviation. Expected value is central tendency, average income, and whereas the standard deviation is the measure of risk. Let's look at this slide here, and before this slide we want to draw a graph. By adding more, if you look at this, what we are doing is the range is from 1000 to 2000 for job number 1 and the range is 13 to 1700 for job number 2. Therefore, looking at the spread and the peak here, the risk avoider is going to prefer job 2 over job 1. Now, by adding $100 more in job number 1 offer, we are recalculating the expected value and we are recalculating the risk, which is the standard deviation. So, looking at it, if job number 1 is giving you $2,100, we are adding 100, then the other outcome, the probability remaining the same, 50% of getting 2,100 and 50% of getting 1,100. And if we calculate the expected value, so the expected value is 1,600 and the standard deviation is $500. For job 2, everything remains the same, 599.50. اب اس سینیریو میں جب ہم نے $100 زیادہ ایڈ کر دیا جاب 1 میں تو آپ کی ایکسپیکٹڈ ویلیو از 1600, اسٹینڈرڈ ڈیویشن از 500. جاب 2 میں ایکسپیکٹڈ ویلیو 1500 اینڈ اسٹینڈرڈ ڈیویشن از 99.50. اب کون سی جاب کو آپ پریفر کریں گے اوور دی ادر جاب؟ جاب 1 میں رسک زیادہ ہے 500 لیکن ایکسپیکٹڈ ریٹرن بھی زیادہ ہے 1600 کا. جاب 2 میں رسک کم ہے 99.50 کا بٹ ایکسپیکٹڈ ویلیو بھی کم ہے 1500 کی. کس گریٹر رسک؟ اب دیٹ ڈیپینڈز آن دی انڈیویجول. اب اگلے لیکچر میں ہم دیکھیں گے کہ انڈیویجولز ہیو ڈفرنٹ ایٹیٹیوڈ ٹورڈز رسک. رسک نیوٹرل ہیں, رسک اوائڈر ہیں, رسک لور ہیں. تو ڈپینڈنگ آن یور ایٹیٹیوڈ ٹورڈز رسک, نارملی ہمارے جو انڈیویجولس ہوتے ہیں وہ رسک اورس ہوتے ہیں. موسٹ آف دیم وڈ لائک ٹو سلیکٹ جاب نمبر 2 ایز کمپیئر ٹو جاب نمبر 1. اب اس سارے کچھ کو سم اپ کرتے ہوئے آج کے لیکچر میں ہم نے کیا کیا کور اپ کیا. ہم نے اسٹارٹ کیا کہ اس سے پہلے ہم نے انکم اور پرائس لیولز کو وتھ سرٹینٹی ازیوم کر کے کنزیومر کے بیہیویئر کو انالائز کیا تھا, لیکن آج ہم نے جب ازیوم کیا کہ سچویشن از ناٹ لائک دی سیم اور ہمیں جو ہے پاسبل آؤٹ کمز اینڈ سیناریوز کو دیکھنا پڑتا ہے اور ان سیناریوز کے ساتھ ان کی لائکلیہڈ آف اکرنس کو دیکھنا پڑتا ہے. تو وٹ وی ہیو کم اپ ود از ڈسکرائبنگ دی کانسیپٹ آف رسک. اب اسی رسک کے کانسیپٹ کو یوز کرتے ہوئے ہم اگلا لیکچر کنٹینیو کریں گے اور اس میں ہم یہ دیکھیں گے کہ ہر انڈیویجول کا ایٹیٹیوڈ ٹورڈز رسک از ڈفرنٹ. اب ان کو ہم کیٹیگرائز کر سکتے ہیں رسک لورز میں. دیز آر دی انڈیویجول جو کہ ایکسپیکٹڈ ویلیو کم بھی ہو لیکن پھر بھی وہ رسکی وینچرز میں جانا چاہتے ہیں. دی سیم ایکسپیکٹڈ ویلیو بٹ اف اٹ از مور رسکی بٹ دے پریفر دیٹ رسک اوور دی لیس ایکسپیکٹڈ ویلیو ایونٹ. Then there are individuals who are risk neutral, they are indifferent. There are individuals who are risk avoider or risk averse. Risk averse جو ہیں they are looking for more compensation for assuming more risk. So یہ تینوں کیٹیگریز جو ہے رسک لاور کی, رسک اوائڈر کی اور رسک نیوٹرل کی ہم اگلے لیکچر میں انشاءاللہ کور اپ کریں گے اور اس کے ساتھ ساتھ دی کانسیپٹ آف دی رسک پریمیم بھی انٹروڈیوس کریں گے اور انکم اور رسک کا ریلیشن شپ جو ہے وہ بھی انشاءاللہ کور اپ کرنے کی کوشش کریں گے. اور لاسٹلی رسک کی جو ہے سچویشنز وہ زیادہ ہوتی ہیں بزنس ایگزیکٹوز کے اس لیے ہم بزنس ایگزیکٹو کا ایٹیچیوڈ اور رسک جو ہے اس سارے کو کور اپ کرتے ہوئے اگلے لیکچر میں ہم رسک والے کو کچھ حد تک ریپ کر دیں گے. تو اب انشاءاللہ اب اجازت دیجیے ڈاکٹر طلعت کو. اگلے لیکچر میں ان سب کانسیپٹ کے ساتھ آپ سے ملاقات ہوگی. اللہ حافظ.